Welcome to the Consumer Code Show, where we believe that humans are incredible and we are living in a first era in history where behavioral data and AI have hit scale so we can go from consumer insight to business activation in no time. In this show, we explore the world of retail through the lens of demography, cartography, ethnography, and the economy. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. Okay, welcome to the show. Today we have Richard Leslie, who is the president at Surface Agency. And if you are in the restaurant marketing world, this is going to be a real treat for you because Richard thinks about customer segmentation in a way that I've not heard from any other restaurant marketer. And he also thinks about all the way down to the unit economics, all the way down to ROI for restaurants. So he's going to walk us through that. I want to really tease out how he thinks about that. But first, we're going to get into his background. So Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lyden. Glad to be here.
So if we could start here first, I would love for you to tell our listeners about Surface Agency.
Sure. Well, we are a sort of a combination of three disciplines, part management consultancy, part creative shop, and part performance agency. And so we approach everything, really through the lenses of, first, what is it that needs to happen? Where can we create leverage? And then the second thing is the delivery vehicle. So that's usually media. And then third and lastly is what is the communication or the creative message that's going to convert, whether that's a visit or a lead. It just depends on the type of client. But that's our basic approach.
When you say what needs to happen and where can we create leverage, this feels outside of the traditional media agency. Tell me about that part.
Yeah, sure. Well, a long time ago, creative and media and even consulting sort of separated into their own disciplines. And our objective is to bring those all back into a single shop. And so, our leads and any of our departments in analytics and media and creative, they're all from large agencies, and consulting firms with long history. But the idea is that, these things shouldn't operate in silos, that they really need to inform each other. And really in a lot of companies, they're very separate. You might have a Bain or a McKinsey or a BCG doing your, strategic work and analytics work, and then a different agency doing your media. And then you got a creative shop that's more interested in winning awards than they are in driving results. And we're just not interested in that. What we're really interested in is how do we move the needle? And in most cases, we're in a multi-unit retail environment, and it's about how do we move the needle at the unit level. The aggregate of all of that work moves the system level, but we start at the unit level.
That's one of the places where I noticed something was different about you in our first conversations, because you were saying things like, you're talking about the pricing at the store level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not usually something an agency is talking about, or you're talking about, hey, moving a percent in foot traffic or in total store traffic has a certain impact on EBITDA, which has a certain impact on stock price. And I hadn't talked to anybody that was thinking of that holistically. So I'm excited to get into that. Let's go into your career first. I want to start there because I think it's going to give people a little bit of context to how you think today. So if you could, I'd love to go just through the phases of your career as a marketer and some lessons learned in each of them.
Sure. I took a very unorthodox route. Probably post Mad Men, I was on a Don Draper level route into the marketing world. I started in the entertainment world as a DJ, and I ended up working at an agency just because the agency was very focused on, at the time, they didn't know they were coining this term, but they were very focused on influencer marketing. And it was the very first agency that did influencer marketing. It was called KBA out of Chicago, and Kevin Berg and Associates. And I was hired to as one of 3 people across the country, to really, focus in on niche audiences. And when I say
Hmm.
niche, I mean, like, you know, in every major city in the US, we would find the rockabilly club and the punk club and the gay clubs and the house music clubs and these super niche audiences. And we would build marketing programs inside of those audiences. And it was typically for tobacco. It was
Hmm.
for RJ Reynolds. And at the time, RJ Reynolds was a fighter brand. Marlboro was 10 or 11 times their size and market cap. And so, and then no one was allowed to advertise after the legacy judgment. So, uh, these programs are massive influencer programs that were like entrenchment programs at the local level where we would literally build the entire market program at around all the units that spoke to all of those audiences. So nightclubs, lounges, restaurants, bars, you name it. And so each market was the aggregate of all of those little niche lifestyle um, audiences. And then we would push programs down into them.
When you say programs, what did that look like?
Could be musical tours, could be art tours, book signings with authors, you name it. We did anything that would move the needle culturally that would be um, positively responded to by those audiences. So our mission was to fit in those places and make Camel a natural part of that landscape.
Got it.
And then
Okay.
that platform ended up being used for other brands like Coors and Smirnoff and Durex condoms. We had a lot of brands that were implemented in that fashion.
So, would you say that would it be accurate to say that you were finding these countercultural audiences, these countercultural niche audiences, and finding reasonable ways to fit the brand message in there?
Yeah, I think I didn't know it at the time, but it was sort of the beginning of understanding Pareto's principle, right? Like
Mhm.
what's the smaller audience that you have to move in order to eventually move a larger audience? And these were aggregates of these small audiences. And together, they created this huge cultural movement that allowed Camel to punch way above its weight against Marlboro. Marlboro ended up trying to copy it after a few years, but Camel had a real head start.
This is why you responded in that little LinkedIn post I had about the harbinger consumer, the
Right.
consumer that you need to hit first that might not be the biggest portion of the market, but they're the ones that are gonna go tell other people, and by the way, I didn't make that up. One of our furniture customers actually kind of discovered that term and coined it for me anyways, and it made so much sense when they were like, "This segment, once these people see it, well, I see all the other segments buy it."
Yep. And if you can't be authentic for that segment, you will never, especially if
Mm,
your brand or product is relying on cultural authenticity. Um, some big brands really tried to do this the wrong way. I can remember when Coca-Cola launched, I think it was vanilla Coke or it was one of their flavored Coca-Cola brands. And they hired a bunch of skateboarders to infiltrate skateboard parks, and they weren't real skaters, they were actors. And so they didn't have the hallmarks that a skater would understand about their own culture, right? Like the pads weren't worn correctly, the shoes didn't have the wear marks that all skaters would have from falling and burning holes in the tops of their toes and their shoes, and so it was rejected wholesale. Like it was a huge bust. And it was like an ad age and it was just because they tried to appropriate the culture instead of actually supporting the culture.
now I've got a hypothesis that I'm continuing to test, and I'm curious your response to it. My response or my thought around niche audiences is that when you're a challenger brand, you actually and you're smaller, you don't have the most market share. You actually need to focus on those niche audiences, and you need to over penetrate a particular audience intentionally
Mhm.
until you grow in market share enough, and then you actually need to look more like your category. So I guess, one, I'd like your response to that, and then two, my next question to you is niche audiences a reasonable strategy for a brand if you already have massive amounts of market share like Coca-Cola? Can you even execute that, or is it like ignore that approach?
No, it can be executed, and in fact, Coca-Cola has done it successfully several times. In fact, I was just, today because of this, you made me think about looking at my LinkedIn profile, and so I was going back and remembering some of the things that I did with Coca-Cola way back, and some of them were very niche ideas like this, where we found specific audiences and targeted them in advance in order to sort of be the vanguard of a larger mass movement. But again, a lot. There's a whole section of cultural society, like just subcultures that reject mass messages, right? And so, getting there first and getting their approval um, is it just ends up speeding the way towards the mass acceptance of what it is you're trying to say.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
I got a product right here. This was a good example when we launched the aluminum bottle for Coca-Cola. So this was called the M5. They're a little dusty. But each of these bottles was the very first time contoured aluminum could be made. So the Coca-Cola shape bottle, the contour bottle, could be put into aluminum. And so it was a big global push, and it was 20 country launch, I believe. But it only launched in high-end lounges, ultra lounges, and nightclubs. And the whole idea was to be an on-premise package first, where the tastemakers and trendsetters were. And so
Mm.
all of the bottles have ultraviolet ink on them, so in black light, they change colors.
Oh.
Bartenders were given rings, um, so that, if you impregnated this with alcohol, you could put the ring over it and make a cocktail and just put a straw so that the package was always in the consumer's hand instead of being emptied into a glass where you lose
Yeah.
all the branding. So
Wow.
so Coca-Cola's done it, big companies have done it. I think they sometimes lose the plot, not necessarily Coke, but bigger organizations sometimes lose the plot, and that's usually a function of people, people turnover, because
Mhm.
certain people have a point of view about it, and sometimes those people leave, and people that come in after them don't share that point of view.
What was phase 2 of your career?
Phase 2, well, that was the sort of DIY part of my career where, I was at that agency for a long time, and at some point decided that I could do it myself. And so I started an agency called Trend Influence, and essentially it was a early stage influencer agency where we would, look for cultural opportunities for brands.
What's the
And
time frame here? What year was this?
mm, 2000 to 2010.
Okay.
Um, and that agency, I ended up building it and selling it to a public company called MDC Partners. But in the course of time, we built that agency from almost nothing, just bootstrapping all the way to until we were launching new brands for Levi Strauss and Coca-Cola globally. And, we were doing the ethnographic research all around the world. One of the things we really got into at an early stage of my career was learning how research should be applied, and you know a lot of in the marketing world there was just a sort of two sizes fits all. It was focus groups and surveys, right? And and it really just didn't leave a lot of room for cultural nuances to shine through. Um,
Mhm.
and so we really pioneered, well, amongst there were other agencies that were doing it as well, but we really pushed hard on ethnographic research and cultural research, semiotics research, like understanding the meaning and culture of symbols and uh and ended up doing some great work for Levi Strauss. We launched Denizen Jeans, for instance. That was a global project for Levi's. Um, and that jean is still the brand of Levi's that's in Target in the US, but globally it's its own brand, has its own
You
flagships.
know, I feel like I've heard of Denizen, but I don't know the strategy behind the Denizen brand.
Yeah, it was an interesting strategy. You know, what we had found in the US, it was a channel strategy, right? Because Walmart had Levi's standard and Target, if Levi's had given Target standard, Walmart would have crushed it. So it was I can't remember how many hundreds of millions of dollars in the channel, but they essentially said we have to create a new brand
Mm,
for Target. And at the same time, there was an opportunity around the world with this, what they called emerging middle class, which was, often a consumer that was maybe their first time, um, first person in the family going to college and having a career in the city. And these
mm.
largely in BRIC nations, China, India, Turkey, Brazil. So this brand was created really for these sort of young professionals to have their first, you know, s- um, sort of clothes that were appropriate in an urban setting. They weren't too
Mhm.
dressy, but they weren't too dressed down either. And so the brand sort of had a dual function outside the US and inside the US.
I wonder because I see in the Levi's sales data today a deep penetration of the Hispanic consumer. And I wonder how much is a secondary effect of that. Now, this is limited, right? Because I can only see Levi's their direct to consumer sales and their physical retail or their online sales. I don't see their wholesale like through Target.
Uh-huh.
But I wonder if there's a secondary effect there, or if Levi's have just consistently been popular with a Hispanic consumer. I'm not sure.
We did a lot of work with Hispanic consumers actually in that project, but this is 15 years ago, so it's quite a while ago.
Okay, is there another kind of like big chunk phase in your career between then and Surface Agency?
Yeah, so, I decided I wanted to go client side at one point, so I did another stint at an agency, called BFG, and so I was there for quite a while, and they were a pretty good size agency. Again, they did a lot of very similar influencer type marketing and more culturally oriented marketing, and then decided I wanted to go client side, and I ended up going to work at a company called PopSockets, which is a cell phone
Mhm.
accessory brand.
Yep.
Um, so I did a small stint there, and since then I did some consulting work afterwards, and just decided that I wanted to create a new agency, and it was really because of some new technologies that I was seeing come available, which led me to you eventually.
Mhm.
But really, it started with understanding Placer. And the reason that I was trying to understand Placer is because I was a CMO at a construction company. And I had talked to the owner of the company about creating an agency and said, look, instead of having a department that does marketing, why don't we have an external agency, and the company can be a client of the agency, and then the agency can take on external clients as well. And part of the reason for that was that as the construction company was competing against larger companies and honestly getting into the developer space, I realized that Placer provided a unique opportunity to um, help brands and companies understand ideal areas for real estate development based on the audiences that they would cater to, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but then the other side of that is after you build that retail space, you've already got you've already plotted the audiences that you then need to market to. So you sort of connect the circle right there between where's the best place to put it, build the thing, and then connect with the audiences that are gonna um that the brand's gonna cater to.
Right on.
And
And for anybody listening here that might be not be familiar with Placer, it is a software platform that leverages foot traffic data, and that's usually, well, always coming from mobile phones. And so it's saying, okay, here's your restaurant or your location, here's the estimated amount of visits, and then here's where they come from. That's primarily at a high level what Placer does and what Richard's talking about. Okay, go on, Richard. Just want to make sure people had a definition for that.
yeah, and as I got more and more into its capabilities, I started to realize that its true power for me as an agency, or what it would be for an agency, is in segmenting audiences, not just looking at the sheer volume of audiences, like who goes into the footfalls into a location and the days of week and all that stuff's great. And it's great for understanding, the relative health of a business, for instance. Um, but what we realized is that understanding who those people were was far more powerful. And so that was the reason that we created Surface. It was really, the agency was born out of the idea that, um, especially for multi-unit and for retail, multi-unit retail, there just isn't there aren't a lot of good options for, marketing that don't, especially the big systems, right? That don't start at top down type of, almost, it's
Sure.
like the advertising world, version of trickle down economics, right? It's like,
Yep.
spend a ton of money up here and eventually it will benefit a unit in Boise. And,
Yep.
and even DMA level spending is just such a massive spend, area, right? And what we took, from Placer and then applying the spatial AI segments inside of Placer, we actually looked at it like, okay, we can now look at any location, any business, and we can look at its competitive set, and we can actually start to get, we pull the raw data out of the platform, right? And we build our own analytics processes around it, but we start to look at, you know, in any one trade area, and we determine what the trade areas are. We don't do a simple radius or anything like that. We determine the trade areas based on the audiences, and and every trade area is different. We see trade areas for some of our clients, the same client, right? They could have, 80% of their visits coming from within 3 miles, and we'll see another same restaurant, say in Maine, and 80% of their visits are coming from a band 25 miles to 45 miles out, right? And, and so trade area dynamics is a big piece of what we put together with this, but none of that was really possible, a few
Yep.
years back.
Yeah. I'm having a light bulb moment go on about you and your career and why you discovered this opportunity, why you think this way, because you came from the world of you were building niche audiences, essentially making these cultural influencers ground up to, and you were seeing the impact that it was moving the needle. But the whole advertising world, not the whole, but a lot of it really operates on this top down approach where you're running these national media campaigns. There's no individual attention to specific trade areas or portfolios or fleets of units. This is where the multi unit comes in, or multiple restaurant locations. But then you start working at this and marketing at this construction company, which inherently included geography because you were dealing with physical space of construction. That's
Mhm,
when you discovered mobile location data and Placer. You could see you can make these dynamic trade areas where in a way that you could not in the past. And
right.
then you discovered our segments, which is the who behind the people that are showing up. And you're like, all right, now for the first time, I can at scale understand who are coming to these restaurants or these locations, and that can be actionable and targeting for me. Am I kind of understanding that the career epiphany there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of like the gateway drug, right? So it started with wanting to understand the audiences that drive any particular business, right? And knowing that they're different. And that's something that we've really found as we've grown our client base, that a bigger system, right? You may think that there's a one size fits all customer base for some big brand, right? And it's just not the case. Like we found that yeah, you can roll a system level lookup and say, yeah, these four segments account for most of your visits, right? But what if they don't? What if in Wichita that's not the segments that you need to cater to,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
if all of your marketing is this sort of, I don't want to call it lazy, but it's definitely a shortcut idea, like we're talking to this one sort of persona and it's just this type of person and they're everywhere that we are. And it's just not the case. Right. And
Right.
even if they are sort of there, like the segments act incredibly different um, in different parts of the country. We've
Yep.
just seen, our analytics, our system's sort of a living, breathing system. And we take in third party data, we ingest first party data, every 24 hours from our retail systems. And then we take that and run our analytics processes over it. Right. And so at any one time, as we're pushing media out into the market, we're seeing how it's being received. And so if a value message isn't being received in parts of California or in parts of the East Coast, Northeast Coast, but they do like, say, a premium message or a family message or a bar message, um, the system's telling us that. So we're modeling the media almost in real time based on how these segments are telling us they want to receive media, and then
Wow.
how they act against it, because the real litmus is when they go into a unit and they purchase, right? We get all that basket data back every 24 hours, so we can see like, oh, chicken is big, burgers not, burgers are big, chicken's not. Like we can see all of that almost real time and apply it back to the media.
Nice. This is where we're kind of getting into the maybe structured, actionable part of the segmentation. You've had some big wins with Red Robin that I'd love for you to talk through, and maybe just start me. And we're already kind of getting into it here. Start me off on your view of the system and the structure that you've set up to run marketing using segmentation and mobile data with Red
Yeah.
Robin.
Yeah, so Red Robin is a great case study for us. We've worked at several different system levels, down to 3 unit systems, and up to the size of Red Robin, which is a national footprint. And the great thing about Red Robin is that um, they were already well into a turnaround plan, and a lot of the things that they could have structurally affected, inside of their 4 walls, and even in their restaurant supply or support center, they were already well on the way of fixing those, a lot of the issues that the brand had had. And so, at the time that we came in last summer, um, we came in with this idea that, hey, you know, what will really drive this turnaround forward is a more efficient marketing program that builds a foundation from the unit level up. So
Mhm.
instead of looking at, I have this much budget, how much broadcast media can I afford? We looked at it like, you have this many hundreds of units. How much media will it take at the unit level to build the bottom of the funnel, which is the demand side of the funnel, right? At the unit level, so that we can capitalize on any pent up demand that's there. And so we just sort of built the system from the ground floor up, which is really the opposite of the way that most agencies approach multi-unit systems. They 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 approach more from a top level pressure down than a bottom up.
What did that process look like for your team? And then what did the, if you can, as much as you can tell me, what did the system look like at the end? Because, I mean, you're not doing literally individual level marketing for every single red robin, but at some point there's a trade-off on the individual attention that you give. So how did you build that system?
Sure, sure. Well, you're right. We could get down to the unit level and do unit level
You
marketing,
have
but
the data for sure.
the data's there, the efficiencies aren't there. And so what we've done is built a system where when we ingest that third party data, which is things like placer, traffic, and spatial AI segmentation, and even in some cases, some primary research. So I think I told you we used spatial AIs. A lot of your when we did our semantic map modeling for our analytics piece, we also looked at your segments to build our algorithms for recruiting for qualitative research.
Hmm.
So on that third party piece, we get as detailed as we can or as the client has appetite for. Right.
That's pro level, by the way. That third piece is pro level when you're actually going and talking to the segments. That's amazing.
Yeah. So we would analyze the system and say, okay, here's the 4 segments that we think are the core, and I'm just making up a number, but that we think are the core basis for your customers across the country, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then from there, build algorithms to go out and speak to those people and recruit against them, and go deeper with ethnographic dine-alongs and go to their house and just spend a half a day with them, and try to understand why they do what they do.
Did you
Um,
do that with the Red Robin team, or did you do that research independent of them?
no, they were involved,
Alright,
heavily involved.
you brought them along. I mean, I always found that to be extremely powerful and cathartic to actually bring them along in the research.
Yep, they came along where they could, and then where they couldn't, we do videography of everything and edit video, sort of captures for the broader audiences inside of Red Robin to understand.
So you get these primary segments. You have the data around the segments and how much of that segment makes up of the revenue of Red Robin, as well as the traffic of Red Robin or any restaurant. You take them alongside those segments, so they're getting to build a picture not only of like quantitatively, they're shaking hands, they're eating with these people. So they got a good visual, like they got a gut understanding of who
Mhm.
this consumer is. Then what do you do? Because right now we've pent up a bunch of insights, but we haven't taken any into action.
Yeah, so if you think about it, there's sort of 3 tiers to this. There's the third party or what we call the market, and then there's the first party, which is our data. So we bring the actual basket level data, visits, sales, metrics, loyalty even. We bring that in, and then that's where we run the modeling against it. So, there's sort of three big things that we do that I think help us get from analytics that tells you, typical analytics, which is sort of like, here's what happened, to how do we direct growth, right? And directing growth is what our whole goal is. So, taking things like spatial AI segments and pulling out all of the detail, the rich detail that's in the psychographic segments, and doing semantic modeling over our data, that allows us to understand, like, okay, how are these people responding to messages? What messages, when you combine that with basket and purchase data, you start to understand, okay, these areas respond better to these types of messages. Um, and then we do something that's called pretty common, but again, I don't think it's applied the way that we apply it, which is we do a k-means cluster analysis, and we try to understand in a large system, because we can't mark it down to the unit level, right? How many of these units cluster in certain ways? Um,
Hmm.
it's a fingerprint, like it's a signature. So each unit has a signature. Well, there's maybe 5 or 10 different types of signatures in a system, right? And so that allows us to say, okay, these signatures is how we're going to split up the media and the communications. And so we start to push our communications very much based on the signatures in these clusters. So that
That
allows us
is,
to push multiple messages at any one time. Right
to
now, I think
me, that is so powerful because you are getting the benefits of personalization without the trade-offs of all the man hours that would go into the effort of doing each individual one. So you're getting personalization there, but you're also getting some efficiency and scale that you need with things like meta ads. You need
right.
some at bats there. How do you know when you have enough clusters? Like how do you make that decision?
Well, the k-means analysis does that for us. And it,
Okay,
it
so and I just want to help people understand k-means. So it's a mathematical algorithm, but essentially what it does is like it is using it's clustering similar stores in this case until you reach this elbow. And so I'm drawing a line for people that are listening that goes up, and then the elbow bends in its predictive capability. And it's like adding another cluster doesn't improve your predictive capability that much. Like it always will a little bit, but you kind of get the bulk of like, okay, the main differences are in 5 clusters or 6 clusters.
Mhm. And it's the basis behind all segmentation, right? So
Mhm.
it's really how you determine how many segments are sort of mutually exclusive of each other that you can move. And so, uh, just like human audiences, a system, a big restaurant or retail system acts the same way. They act in these clusters. And by the way, when we see the footprint, a national footprint, you may think that this is the same as a regional, like the Southeast acts differently than the Southwest. That is absolutely not the way it works. Like we see clusters based on unit behavior, and you might have a unit in Chicago that acts the same way as one in Miami Beach, right? And so
Wow.
they're in a cluster together, even though they are nowhere near geographically located. They're going to get the media and the message that we need them to get. And
And
so,
that is not at all how most multi-unit marketing brands think about. They usually like, okay, this is our Southwest, this is our Northeast. But what you're saying
right,
is like you can have a place in Chicago that is more similar to Miami than it is the next restaurant over in Chicago.
yeah, exactly. And then we run something that's pretty exciting that, from my CPG background, which is called a PETA analysis. And are you familiar with that?
No,
I,
I'm not.
okay. So, a PETA analysis, it's the word PETA, like pita bread. Um, and it's essentially the P stands for PETA, or for people. So that P is spatial AI, right?
Hmm.
So it's and that P is different at the unit level all the way up to the system level, depending on how granular you look at it. So the I is the incidence, right? The T is times, and the A is amount. And then I would add another. It ruins the acronym, but um, we look at basket as well. So it's not just amount, but it's like what is it that they bought?
Yeah, what
So
yeah.
it really ruins the acronym, so we don't use it. But the idea there is then you take this analysis at the unit level, and it will literally tell you if the people piece is it tells you who the segments are that move the unit, that move that particular unit. But it also gives you the incidents, the times, the amounts, and what they're buying because we're ingesting all that data, and it can forecast a next best action. So it's often called next best dollar or next best action, but we can look at the unit level all the way up to the system level and not only see what our next best action should be, but how much it's worth to the system.
Can you give me an example of what that next best action is?
Well, so say we need to increase amount, the A, right? So that a lot of times in restaurants that's a per person amount, right? So um an action there might be add bacon. Like we need to promote a message where, and it might not even be through advertising. It may be internal to the system. Like we need to promote some type of an action that increases that amount, right? Because we know that if these audiences that we have at that unit, if incidence stays the same, time stays the same, but we can increase the amount they sell, that's worth this much to the system.
Mhm.
Um, Either to the unit all the way up in aggregate to the system.
How
So
do
at
you
any time,
quantify how much it's
we can
worth?
tell what that is.
How do you quantify how much it's worth?
Um, well, so we're running all that data through the system, and it allows you to put in some sort of assumptions. So if we got a 1% lift or a 2% lift or a 3% lift or a 5% lift, um, you could see what the effect on the unit all the way up to the system would be. So it tells you, okay, your next best action is with the P. So say it's A3, right? One of your spatial AI segments, A3, and we want to increase incidents or times or amounts, or we want to sell them something that we think they'll buy, which would be a basket level. It literally, we can look at those assumptions and say, okay, the most money for the system will be based on moving the needle in this vertical. So what
Mhm.
can we do to move that needle in that vertical? And then that it comes back to an exercise with culinary or with marketing or a combination of all the above.
Got it. Okay. Now I'm kind of picturing it. So, AO3, which I believe is our segment suburb chic, we know that those people represent 2.6 million people in the United States. You have that data around every single, clustered Red Robin or restaurant,
Yep.
and you know how many of those people are around there. So you have you can narrow that down to like, okay, 1.2 million people will be affected by this. We know that those people's basket size is this amount. And then you have some internal data that says, um, if we add bacon, we believe that we can bump the amount up. And so you can actually run a model in the same way that I would get on Excel and run a financial forecast on if we improve or we push this menu item to this particular segment, this is the amount of growth that we expect.
Yep. Exactly.
Right on.
And it could be adding a beverage or, upsell a shake or a alcoholic beverage, whatever it might be. Um, but the system, once all that data is there, it starts to become very predictive, but it's also very efficient. So, like, we're seeing, I mean, incredible efficiencies. Most of our competitors are outspending us 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 to 1 for the same traffic.
If you could really nail it down, like why are you seeing efficiencies in your approach versus the standard approach?
Well, first off, because we start with that foundation and build up. So you no matter what you want in a multi-unit retail system, you want demand level happens locally, right? It's so easy to like look at regions and DMAs and national footprints, but at the end of the day, most people don't travel more than 3 or 4 miles from their house
Mhm.
95% of their life, right?
Mhm.
So um our system is really built to activate at that local level. So we look at all of the competitors that we share visitation with because again we can see that data. We know that if they go to this restaurant, they also go to these other 4 or 5 restaurants, and our goal is to win more of those shares of visits because you know and you're very familiar with share of wallet. I see it in a lot of your posts and stuff. Consumers aren't adding visits, right? They're not adding incremental visits to their life. They're just shifting their visitation around amongst a set of um, usual suspects. And so our whole system is takes into account the idea that your big retail systems are just an aggregate of these cells, right? These unit level businesses. And so we have to really make sure that we're treating every one of those businesses equally.
Yep. Yep. So part of it is you have some geographic efficiency where the national campaign would basically spend it sort of everywhere. You have geographical efficiency there. You have personalized efficiency with your clusters as well.
Yep.
Have we kind of captured the process and we can get into the some of the results that you're saying?
Yeah, sure. You know, a lot of the results are just, Red Robin has just released its annual 2025 results and Q4 results just a couple weeks ago, and their stock price took a big leap. I think a 38% leap. Um, and we're still in the early days of doing this, and it's not all our system, right? There's a lot going on at Red Robin that's pushing the needle on that's part of this, right? The success is got to be at the organizational level. It has to be institutionalized, and then part of that is looking at the market differently, right? And
Hmm.
you're a fighter brand, and you have to punch way above your weight. You're looking for efficiencies everywhere, and that's part of what our system does. Is it allows brands like Red Robin to really efficiently deliver messages to the marketplace.
Now, a question that I've had for you is I've got two, but we'll start with the first one. Is how do you determine the distribution of your media spend across social or national advertising or CTV? How are you thinking about where you're putting that advertising dollar?
Yeah. Again, bottom up. So we look at the demand um, funnel, and we see how the bottom of the funnel is working, and then we just move up it. And so you move up into Meta and eventually into CTV. We don't do any broadcast, but we do. Some of our units are getting upper funnel media, for instance, and the system is very predictive, so it tells us, where to spend to get the most efficiency from the dollars. But the one thing we're very careful about is, you know, everybody from every unit in the system is taken care of at the bottom of the funnel, and then the next level up. And so at the highest level, we're looking where we can make the dollars work the hardest for us. And so
Hmm.
that's where, again, the system points to the units that are most likely to be receptive at those higher level of funnel spends. Um, you know, Everybody wishes they had more money in the budget, right? Um, but what we found is, and it's this case with most of our clients, is the more efficient you can get with the spend, the more profitable the business gets, and then the budgets increase.
Those increase. I was just recently doing a pretty big brand teardown on Chili's and looking at how the sequence of their operations from 2022 on when Kevin Hochman took over, and it's like really they focused on unit economics first, reduced the menu size, and then they started thinking about advertising because the margins started paying off to even be able to do that and to be even able to handle the foot traffic, which has been the big driver there. So I totally get that. When you are developing for those clusters, are you designing different creative and imagery for the clusters? Is there crossover?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there different products that you put forth in one cluster that you would in another?
Yep. So some of that's budget driven because we have we have a function where we deliver specific messages to specific clusters. So um, the message is like what I was mentioning earlier. You might have clusters of restaurants that perform a certain way. And again, they could be anywhere in the country, but their fingerprints say that they're this type of restaurant, right? And then we have a series of messages that we drive into those clusters, and the clusters are telling us what's going to be well received, right? So if the data is saying these units are not going to be responsive to an adult or a bar message, then we're not wasting our time there. But it also might say,
Mm,
well, they are going to be responsive to a family message or to a value message. Then that creative is what these people will get, right? And then some other cluster might get a bar message. So we're creating several different campaigns, and then there's variations of them. So if you think about all the units and all the different platforms like TikTok, Meta, there's 2 platforms there, Google, and then, on up into CTV. Um, at any one time in the US, we're probably running 30,000 ads,
hmm
30,000 unique ads,
Yep. Yep.
and the unique either in a mechanical or a message or both.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And the creative diversity, as I understand it, is like Andromeda's love language, and Andromeda is
It
the
is.
basically the choosing algorithm for meta ads.
Yes,
Okay, so
and
let's get
big
in.
learning curve for a lot of digital agencies right now.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%, man. Okay, so that essentially what you've done is like the clusters are also your creative bookends or bounds for what types of creative that you make. Are you leveraging like well, and let me just kind of like imagine what your scenario would look like in meta ads. So in meta ads, you have a campaign, and the campaign is to cluster number one. Let's say cluster number one is families. And then within cluster number one, are you running one ad set with like, you know, 15 different ads? Or are you running multiple ad sets in there? Are you using any audiences?
Yeah, so the audiences are very specific to the geolocation. No matter what, those audiences are plugged in, and those audiences guide the algorithms, right? So we try not to ever rely on the platform targeting algorithms. Um, but again, that's a budget. It's a function of budget. So we found that there's usually a couple of creative messages per unit. So we might have at any one time, say, 20 different messages that are in our arsenal, like in our quiver, if you will, those 20 arrows. But we know which two of those 20 are going to be the right ones for each individual unit based on
Hmm.
fingerprint that we've created.
Yep.
So those are the only two that get fired at it.
And are you using, and I actually don't know, are you using any of like, are you porting our audiences out there? Or are you using a different set of audiences that you create? Like, how are you doing that?
We're using your audiences, but we are using them down to the micro segment level. And then often there'll be clusters of them, like an A3 and a B2 and so we'll go
Okay.
down and those will be very unique um, to the location level. It's interesting too because it also allows us to troubleshoot. So, like one thing we've found is that whenever we have a system part of the system that raises its hand and says, we're really hurting or traffic's down or whatever, the first thing we look at are those audiences. Like, oh, okay, there's been a shift, like these audiences that were here when you put this restaurant here 20 years ago are no longer here, or they're moving to this other area, or, this other audience is moving in. Like, so it allows us to get strategic on targeting new audiences as well. And
Yeah.
looking where they're going in the competitive set. I mean, that is like omniscient level. I mean, a
Yes.
years ago, that wasn't a possibility, you'd have to do some serious quantitative research to find out, what a share of wallet was. And,
Yeah, and that's man, that's so fire for the way that you're doing it, because not only can you see on Meta on your side, you can say, all right, we're for whatever reason, for our young professionals are not clicking. We had them clicking for a while, they're not clicking anymore. Okay, that's step one. Step two, you have the conversion data on the back end, so you actually get it all the way down to not the click, but you actually get it down to the purchase. And then step three is you've got the ability through the Placers platform and our platform to see in that DMA or around that restaurant, where is that share going? Like, did our young professionals go to restaurant A, or do they go to restaurant B? Like, who are we losing share to? Now all of a sudden you have a structure for thinking about, okay, what did restaurant A, restaurant B do to gain that share? Like, I see where you're talking about, where it's like omniscient level.
Yeah, and you can even go down to you can even enlist the restaurant staff to go find out, like, "Hey, we see where the share is going. Go there and tell us what's happening in that restaurant. Did they just remodel? Did they add something? Are they doing a happy hour special? Like, what's going on right there?" Because we see it up here, and so we can direct them on the ground to be sort of, our intel force to go
Yes.
and
Yes.
drive that, and that's part of closing the loop that we're trying to build into the broader way this is implemented at our clients, which is how do you empower the local market to be a part of the story? And
Yes.
that's, again, all of this is so new, like, it 5 years ago, unheard of.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. This brings me back to originally what I did. And as you know, as ethnographic research, I was the boots on the ground person. Then we built this data company to be able to get that God's eye view of it. And then I realized, ironically, that the God's eye view is only useful to the extent that it's makes you smarter about where you put the boots on the ground and close the loop. And that's I so appreciate the way that you're using our software to impact and actually move needles for brands. I know we're over time, but as you can tell, I'm nerding out on how you think about things, which is super fun. If people wanted to hear more about you, Richard, or Surface Agency, where do they need to go to catch up?
Um, I'd say our website, there's a lot of CTAs throughout the site that, you can get to, a form fill on it, but, uh, they can also contact me directly. Um, and my email is richard@surfaceagency.co.
Right on, Richard. It was a blast having you.
Yeah, me too. This has been great. And thank you for everything you've done because, uh, I spend every day on your platform fooling around and just trying to learn more about, um, you know, the marketplace. I was in there today looking at credit card spend. Like, and it's amazing what's available now compared to, but you know what else, just as a parting note, what I also say is that even though all of these great tools are available, it's also amazing how, um, people default to the easy route, and that's something that I would say, we take a lot of care about, which is that, when Google or Facebook or any of the big players, when they give you direction about how to use their platform, it's almost always to their benefit. And all these tools like Spatial and Placer, these are tools that you can use to your benefit. And, I think that's where, I've found a ton of value, and honestly, even a lot of what we did before I discovered Spatial, we were applying Mosaic platforms, for instance.
Hmm.
And, we found it to be expensive and not as versatile and not as up to date, not as, immediate in its, evolution of the data from the consumer level. And but again, most people are just letting Google and Facebook think for them.
Yep. Right on. Thank you, Richard.
Yep. Thank you, sir.